James, today I want to tackle something that often intimidates English learners: grammar. Many feel it's complicated or boring. What do you think is the best way to simplify grammar?
Great topic, Emily. Grammar can seem overwhelming, but the best way to simplify it is to break it down into manageable parts and relate it to real communication. Instead of memorizing endless rules, learners should focus on understanding basic structures that help them express ideas clearly and accurately.
That makes sense. So rather than aiming for perfection, the goal is clear communication?
Exactly. Grammar is a tool for clarity, not perfection. When learners prioritize getting their message across, grammar becomes less intimidating. For example, starting with simple sentence patterns like subject-verb-object helps build confidence before diving into complex tenses or clauses.
What would you say is a good starting point for beginners who want to grasp grammar basics?
I usually recommend focusing first on the simple present tense because it's widely used for daily routines and facts. Understanding how to form positive, negative, and question sentences in simple present lays a strong foundation. Then, learners can gradually add other tenses like past simple or future forms.
I've noticed a lot of confusion around verb forms, especially irregular verbs. How should learners approach these?
Irregular verbs are tricky because they don't follow usual patterns. My advice is not to try to memorize them all at once. Instead, learn the most common irregular verbs first, like go, have, make, do, and practice them actively. Using them in sentences, stories, or conversations makes the form stick better than rote memorization.
That's a very practical approach. Now, many learners struggle with articles, when to use a, an, or the. What's a simple way to explain this?
Articles can be confusing, but here's a simple rule: a, and, an, are used for singular, non-specific things, and the is for specific things the speaker and listener both know. For example, I saw a cat means any cat, but I saw the cat means a particular cat you both know. Practicing with lots of examples helps internalize this.
What about prepositions? They often seem random and difficult to master.
Prepositions do take time because they're often idiomatic. My tip is to learn them in phrases rather than alone. For example, learn interested in, good at, on the table, at home as chunks. Repetition and exposure through reading and listening build familiarity naturally.
I've seen grammar exercises that focus on fill in the blanks. Do you think these are effective?
They can be useful for practicing specific structures, but they shouldn't be the only method. Learners benefit more from meaningful practice like writing their own sentences, speaking, or reading in context. That way, grammar becomes part of real communication rather than isolated drills.
Speaking of context, how important is learning grammar through conversation?
It's very important. Grammar learned through conversation sticks better because it's connected to meaning and interaction. When learners use grammar to ask questions, tell stories, or express opinions, they engage actively, which improves retention. Role plays, language exchanges, or speaking clubs are great ways to practice.
Could you give an example of how a learner might practice a grammar point conversationally?
Sure. Let's say you're practicing the past simple tense. You could tell a friend about your weekend: I visited my parents. We watched a movie and cooked dinner. Then ask your friend, what did you do last weekend? This practice uses grammar naturally in communication.
What about common mistakes learners make with grammar?
One big mistake is overcorrecting or trying to be perfect, which can cause hesitation. Another is confusing similar structures, like present perfect versus past simple. Also, learners sometimes translate directly from their native language, causing errors. Awareness of these pitfalls helps learners focus on clarity first and improve accuracy gradually.
How do you recommend learners balance accuracy and fluency?
Start by focusing on fluency, speaking or writing freely without worrying too much about mistakes. This builds confidence and communication skills. Then, gradually pay attention to accuracy by reviewing and correcting common errors. Over time, accuracy improves naturally as fluency grows.
Let's talk about sentence structure. What are the key elements learners should understand?
The basics are the subject, verb, and object. Most English sentences follow this order: subject plus verb plus object. For example, she reads books. Understanding this helps learners build correct sentences and expand with adjectives, adverbs, and clauses later.
How can learners practice sentence structure effectively?
Start by creating simple sentences using familiar vocabulary. Then, experiment by adding descriptive words or changing sentence types, statements, questions, negatives. Writing short paragraphs about daily life or interests helps reinforce structure while practicing grammar.
What's your take on learning grammar through writing versus speaking?
Both are important. Writing allows learners to think carefully about grammar and organize ideas. Speaking develops spontaneous use and pronunciation. A balanced approach using both strengthens overall language skills. For example, writing a diary and discussing it with a partner combines both practices.
Many learners struggle with conditionals. How can we simplify teaching of sentences?
Conditionals can be tricky because there are several types. I suggest starting with the zero and first conditionals, which are the most common. For example, if it rains, I stay home, 0, and, if it rains tomorrow, I will stay home, first. Use clear examples and relate them to everyday situations. Practice making if sentences about weather, routines, or choices.
What role do connectors and conjunctions play in grammar?
Connectors like and, but, because, so help link ideas, making speech and writing more coherent. Teaching learners to use these improves their ability to express complex thoughts. Practice by combining simple sentences into longer ones using connectors.
What are some useful tips for teaching question formation?
Start with yes/no questions using auxiliary verbs. Do you like coffee? Is she coming? Then move to information questions with what, where, when, etc. Drilling common question forms and practicing them in conversation boosts confidence and understanding.
Passive voice often confuses learners. How can it be explained simply?
Explain passive voice as when the subject receives the action, the book was read by her. Start with simple present and past passive forms. Show learners when to use passive, like when the doer is unknown or unimportant. Use examples from news or instructions, which often use passive.
What about modal verbs? How can learners master their use?
Modal verbs express ability, possibility, permission, or obligation, like can, might, must, should. Teach them with clear contexts and examples. For instance, you can swim, you must study. Role plays can help learners practice giving advice, making requests, or talking about possibilities.
Finally, do you have any advice for learners who want to make grammar learning fun and effective?
Absolutely. Use games, storytelling, and real conversations. Grammar books are useful but balance them with interactive practice. Celebrate small wins, don't fear mistakes, and remember grammar is a tool for expressing yourself. Enjoy the learning process and stay curious.
Now that we've covered a lot of grammar basics, what strategies do you recommend for learners to remember grammar rules without feeling overwhelmed?
I always tell learners to focus on one grammar point at a time. Trying to learn everything at once causes overload. Break grammar into small, manageable chunks, like focusing on just past simple verbs this week, then question forms the next. Also, using the grammar actively in speaking and writing helps internalize it better than only studying rules.
That makes sense. So regular practice with real language use is key?
Exactly. Passive learning, just reading rules, isn't enough. Learners should try writing sentences or short paragraphs using the grammar point, and practice speaking it aloud. For example, if you're learning past simple, write about what you did yesterday or last weekend. The more you produce language, the faster grammar becomes natural.
What about making mistakes? Many learners get frustrated when they keep making the same grammar errors. How should they handle that?
Mistakes are a normal and important part of learning. Instead of fearing them, learners should view mistakes as feedback showing where to focus next. I encourage learners to keep a grammar errors journal, where they write down their common mistakes and review them periodically. This helps turn errors into learning opportunities.
That's a great idea. I like the idea of reflecting on mistakes rather than ignoring them. Are there tools that can help learners spot and correct grammar errors?
Yes. There are many grammar checking tools available like Grammarly or the built-in checkers in word processors. These tools give instant feedback and explanations. However, learners shouldn't rely solely on them. They're best used as supplements while learners also study grammar rules to understand why something is wrong.
How do you suggest learners balance studying grammar rules and practicing conversation?
I recommend dedicating specific time to grammar study, maybe 20 to 30 minutes daily or a few times a week. Outside of that, prioritize real conversation or writing practice where you apply what you've learned. Conversation helps build fluency and confidence, while grammar study improves accuracy. Together, they create balanced progress.
Are there specific grammar topics you think learners should prioritize first?
Definitely start with tenses, especially simple present, past, and future, as these cover the majority of daily communication. Next, focus on sentence structure, question forms, and common prepositions. Once comfortable, tackle conditionals, passive voice, and modals. Prioritize what you'll use most often in real life.
Can you share some effective ways to practice tenses in conversation?
A great way is to narrate your day or past experiences aloud. For example, describe your routine in the simple present. I wake up at 7 a.m., I eat breakfast. Then talk about yesterday using the past simple, yesterday, I went to the park. You can also role-play future plans using will or going to. Practicing in context makes tenses clearer and easier to remember.
What about tricky areas like subject-verb agreement? How can learners master that?
Subject-verb agreement can be tough, but starting with simple rules helps. Remember that singular subjects take singular verbs, and plural subjects take plural verbs. Practice with common irregular plurals too, like children are, not children is. Writing and reading sentences aloud helps learners internalize correct forms.
Many learners ask about the difference between some and any. How do you explain this simply?
A simple rule is, some is used in positive sentences or offers, and any in negative sentences or questions. For example, I have some friends, but I don't have any money. Also, would you like some tea, works in offers. Lots of practice with examples and listening to native speakers helps learners feel comfortable using these words naturally.
Another question I get is about using much versus many. What tips do you have?
Much is used with uncountable nouns, like much water, while many is for countable nouns, like many books. Learners can practice by making lists of countable and uncountable nouns and creating sentences. For instance, how many apples do you want, and how much sugar do you need? Practicing these helps learners avoid confusion.
How can learners improve their understanding of complex sentences with clauses?
Breaking down complex sentences into simpler parts helps. Teach learners to identify the main clause and subordinate clauses. Practice combining short sentences with conjunctions like because, although, and if. Visual aids, like sentence diagrams, can clarify sentence structure and relationships.
Can you give an example of breaking a complex sentence down?
Sure. Take the sentence, I stayed home because it was raining. The main clause is, I stayed home, and the subordinate clause is, because it was raining. Understanding this makes it easier to create your own complex sentences and improve writing and speaking sophistication.
What role does reading play in mastering grammar?
Reading exposes learners to grammar in real context, showing how native speakers use structures naturally. It helps learners see patterns, vocabulary, and sentence flow. Choosing interesting books or articles appropriate for their level keeps motivation high. Over time, learners absorb grammar subconsciously through repeated exposure.
Should learners look up every grammar point they find in reading?
Not necessarily. Initially, try to understand the meaning from context. If a grammar structure confuses you, look it up and note it for practice later. Avoid interrupting reading flow too much. Regular reading combined with focused grammar study works best.
Finally, any fun ways to make grammar learning more enjoyable?
Yes. Use games, quizzes, and interactive apps. Try storytelling where you build sentences together, or grammar board games. Role-playing real-life situations lets learners practice grammar dynamically. Celebrate progress and don't fear mistakes. Turning grammar into a game or social activity makes learning much more fun.
Now that we've covered many grammar fundamentals and practice strategies, James, how can learners keep track of their progress effectively?
Tracking progress is key for motivation and improvement. I recommend keeping a grammar journal where learners write down new rules, tricky points, and common mistakes. They can also note examples and corrections from conversations or writing. Reviewing this journal regularly reinforces learning and highlights growth over time.
That's a great idea. What about self-assessment techniques?
Self-assessment helps learners identify strengths and areas to focus on. For example, they can record themselves speaking on a topic and listen for grammar accuracy. Online grammar quizzes and exercises with instant feedback are also useful. Setting periodic goals, like mastering a particular tense or structure each month, helps focus efforts.
Many learners worry about sounding too formal or too casual. How can grammar knowledge help with adapting style?
Understanding grammar allows learners to adjust their style intentionally. Formal writing uses more complex sentences and passive voice, while casual speech uses contractions and simple structures. Knowing grammar means learners can choose how to express themselves appropriately depending on context, whether a business email or chatting with friends.
Can you give examples of formal versus informal grammar usage?
Sure. Formal, I would like to request your assistance regarding the matter. Informal, can you help me out with this? Formal often avoids contractions and uses full forms. Informal language embraces contractions and simpler sentences. Teaching learners these distinctions improves their communication skills greatly.
How important is feedback from native speakers or teachers in grammar learning?
Feedback is invaluable. It helps learners catch errors they might not notice themselves and learn correct usage in context. Constructive correction builds accuracy and confidence. Learners should seek regular feedback through classes, language exchanges, or online tutoring.
What about learners' anxiety when receiving corrections?
Anxiety is common, but it can be reduced by framing correction as positive growth. Teachers and partners should be encouraging and focus on improvement rather than criticism. Learners should remember mistakes mean they're learning. Over time, regular correction becomes less intimidating and more motivating.
How can technology assist learners in receiving feedback on grammar?
Language learning apps often include instant grammar correction and explanations. Platforms like Italki or Preply allow learners to connect with tutors for personalized feedback. Writing tools like Grammarly highlight grammar issues and suggest fixes. Using these resources complements traditional learning and offers convenient practice.
Grammar sometimes feels abstract. How can learners make it more concrete and memorable?
Connecting grammar to real-life situations helps. For example, teach the past tense by recounting a memorable event. Use visuals like timelines for tenses. Role plays, storytelling, and dialogues make grammar practical. Mnemonics or catchy rhymes for tricky rules can also aid memory.
Let's talk about teaching grammar in context. How can learners immerse themselves naturally?
Immersion means surrounding yourself with English. Watching TV shows, reading books, listening to podcasts. Pay attention to grammar patterns used naturally. Try to imitate those patterns in your speech and writing. This contextual learning helps grammar feel less like isolated rules and more like living language.
How important is reviewing grammar regularly?
Very important. Grammar skills fade without practice. Schedule regular review sessions, even after mastering a topic. Mixing old and new material in study sessions, called spaced repetition, strengthens memory. Consistent exposure and use keep grammar knowledge sharp.
Can you share common grammar pitfalls learners should watch out for?
Sure. Confusing verb tenses, especially past simple versus present perfect, is common. Misusing articles, a, an, the, and prepositions is frequent. Sentence fragments or run-ons can confuse meaning. Also, mixing subject-verb agreement or incorrect word order occurs often. Awareness and practice with these avoidable errors improve clarity.
How can learners effectively practice correcting these common errors?
One way is by reviewing your own writing or speaking recordings, looking specifically for typical mistakes. Use grammar checkers to spot errors. Also, peer review or teacher feedback pinpoints areas needing attention. Practice rewriting incorrect sentences correctly reinforces learning.
Do you recommend learning grammar explicitly or implicitly?
Both have value. Explicit learning, studying rules and doing exercises, is important for understanding how grammar works. Implicit learning, absorbing grammar naturally through reading, listening, and speaking, builds intuition. Combining these approaches maximizes effectiveness.
Finally, what motivates you most about helping learners with grammar?
Seeing learners gain confidence and express themselves clearly is incredibly rewarding. Grammar is the backbone of language, and helping someone unlock it opens new opportunities for connection and success. Every step a learner takes toward mastering grammar inspires me.
That's wonderful, James. Any last tips for learners feeling overwhelmed by grammar?
Take it step by step. Focus on communication first, then polish accuracy. Use mistakes as learning chances. Make grammar fun with games and real conversations. Remember, fluency and accuracy grow with time and practice. Stay curious and enjoy the journey.
Thank you, James, for this enlightening conversation. I hope our listeners feel inspired to tackle grammar with new energy.
Thank you, Emily. It's been a pleasure. To all learners, keep practicing, stay patient, and remember, you're capable of mastering English grammar.